Today we're going to continue working on asking and answering questions. Remember, a good reader should always be asking questions. Who, what, when, where, and why. Before we read, we ask these questions as soon as we see a cover page, and that helps us make predictions about what we're going to learn from the reading. We also ask and answer questions during and after reading to help us clear up confusion and to think more deeply about the topic or connect to our memories or schema. We should also be asking ourselves the three big questions. These questions help us keep our understanding. What surprised me? What challenged or changed or confirmed what I already knew? What helped change that schema in my mind? What did the author think that I already knew? And maybe I didn't, and I have to go Google it, find that information. So our objective today is that I can use the success criteria to interact with the text for a deeper understanding. How will we be successful? Well, first, we're going to look at the title and make predictions. We're going to access those important memories in our brain to help us make those predictions. We're going to ask ourselves questions about interesting words or ideas while we're reading. We're going to use text clues to help me answer questions that I ask. And we're going to make connections to memories that we have stored in our brain. We're going to reflect on what we've learned while reading by thinking about the questions we've asked. A successful reader is always thinking while reading. Asking yourself questions and making predictions and making connections are all ways that we interact and enjoy the text that we're reading. So let's get started. First of all, we're going to read, How do you raise a raisin? So look at this cover page. We know that this week we're focusing on informational text, but this text is a bit unusual. If you notice, there's like two fairies on the cover here. This is also a poetry text. So the author is mixing poetry with information. Remember, poetry uses sounds and rhythms of the word to produce images and express feelings. I want you to think about the title and those genres, informational and poetry. Why might the author choose to include poetry in an informational text? Open your book to page 310 and answer that question. I've given you a sentence starter here. The author might include poetry in informational text too. Go ahead and answer that on your own. Pause the video. Okay, now that you have your ideas down, think about, what do you think we're going to read in this text? The title says, How do you raise a raisin? So turn to your partner and tell them, what do you think we're going to learn? What does it mean, how do you raise a raisin? Okay, now that you've had a chance to think about that, raise your hand if you'd like to share your idea. Please turn to page 312. I'm going to read page 312, and then we're going to think about the questions that arise. How do you raise a raisin? Tell me so, I'll know. They're such peculiar little things. How do they sprout and grow? Do raisins grow on Earth or other planets far away? Do aliens collect them and space shuttle them our way? Raisins are dried grapes. So far, there is no proof that raisins grow on other planets. Raisins are grown on Earth in countries like Turkey, Iran, Greece, Australia, and the United States. So who discovered raisins? Were they here when Earth began? Who was the first to nibble them? Dinosaur or man? Raisins were probably discovered when someone or something tasted grapes that had dried on the vine. Over the years, people and animals figured out which grapes produced the sweetest, yummiest raisins. Okay, before I continue to read, I need to ask myself, why did the author write this text? Well, the author writes in paragraph 2, raisins are dried grapes. They grow on Earth in countries like Turkey, Iran, Greece, Australia, and the United States. She also writes many questions asking about how and where raisins grow. How do you raise a raisin? How do they sprout and grow? Do they grow on Earth? Who discovered raisins? Many questions about how and where they grow. So I think she wrote this text to give information about how and where raisins grow. Let's turn to page 313. I can think of questions I want answered in the text as I read. This helps me understand how raisins are grown. So I need to use questions like who, what, when, where, why, and how as I'm reading to help myself understand the text. I'm going to begin in paragraph 5. Please read along with me. Do raisins grow in one place, like Raisin Creek or Raisin Hill? Is there a special town called Raisinfield or Raisinville? Raisins grow best in areas with nice dirt, many days of hot weather, a dry climate, and plenty of water. Almost all of the raisins in the United States are grown in San Joaquin Valley of California, near towns like Chowchilla, Dinuba, Kingsburg, Selma, Weed Patch, and even Raisin City. About 90% of the raisins sold in the United States come from the area around Fresno, California. Do farmers plant some seeds from the local garden shop and wait for raisin bushes to produce a raisin crop? Farmers start a new crop of raisins by taking cuttings from an older grapevine. These pieces of stem are planted in sand until they sprout. Then they are planted in the fields next to a wooden stake. So as I was reading, the information in paragraph 6 says that raisins need plenty of water. So I'll ask a question. Why do raisins need plenty of water to grow? As I read, I need to think about that answer and see if I can find that answer. I know it says they need a dry climate, but plenty of water. So maybe I can find that answer as I read on. Let's move on to page 314. Notice how the grapevines and the sprawling branches grow. Does a grapevine tamer train them into picture-perfect rows? Grapevines are grown about 8 feet apart. Field workers hand-tie the sturdy branches or canes to rows of wire. There are usually 2 sets of wire, a top set that is about 6 feet high, and a second wire that is 3 or 4 feet high. How long do raisins take to grow? A week, a month, or year? How many hours must you wait for a raisin to appear? Well, it takes at least 3 years until the vines are old enough for the first crops of raisins. That is 26,280 hours. So here, I can think of questions I want answered in the text as I read. This helps me understand how the raisins are grown. In paragraph 9, it says that the grapevines and the sprawling branches grow. But we're reading about raisins, so this is confusing. I'm going to ask the question, do grapevines Do grapes and raisins grow on the same plant? I'm going to keep reading to see if I can find this answer. But if you look down here in the bottom, you can see the wires that are up high and then wires that are down low. And you can kind of see how it's tied to the wires. And the next picture here shows fully grown grapevines and how they grow over those wires. And that helps keep them in nice, neat rows. So when it's time to pick the grapes, it's easier for the harvesters to make it down the rows. When grapes are ripe and ready, how do farmers get them down? Do they rent a burly giant to shake them to the ground? Oh, that would be interesting. When the grapes are ready, skilled grape pickers snag the grape clusters from the vines using a sharp vine cutter. Most grapes are turned into raisins the same way they've been for thousands of years. They are left to dry naturally in the sun. Oh, in paragraph 15 it says grapes are turned into raisins. It also says they're left out to dry in the sun. So I found the answer to one of my questions. Go ahead and turn to page 315 and read along with me. What do raisins lie on while they're basking in the sun? Do they rest on little beach towels until they're dried and done? The grape clusters are laid on brown paper trays on the ground. The grape clusters are laid on brown paper trays on the ground between the grapevine rows. This is called laying the grapes down. The sun rises in the east and sets in the west. Most raisin growers plant their vineyards in east to west rows. This way, the grapes drying between the rows receive the most sun. If they were drying in north to south rows, the grapes would be in the shade part of the day. And when it comes to raising raisins, the more sun, the better. I love the picture at the bottom of the page where they're sitting on beach towels. They like to soak up the sun like Mrs. Williams. Okay, paragraph 18. How long do clusters lie around to sweeten, dry, and bake? How many weeks in the valley heat does raisin making take? Raisins bake in the sun for about 2 to 3 weeks. Then the paper trays are rolled into bundles that look like burritos and are left in the field for a few more days to make sure that all the raisins are dry. In paragraph 19, it says they bake in the sun for about 2 or 3 weeks. But the picture shows raisins sitting in the beach chairs, and I don't see an oven. So I think bake doesn't really mean to cook in an oven, but it means to lay out in the sun and get tanned or sunburnt. Mrs. Williams likes to bake herself in the sun in the summer. For raisins, the sun warms them and dries them out. So they don't get a sunburn, it just dehydrates them because they don't drink more water to fluff up. So it sucks all the water out of them and they become dried fruit. This is what it looks like when they lay the raisins down in the rows. Okay, now you're going to take some time to read pages 316 through 318. You're going to do this with your partner. The sub will turn on the timer for 5 minutes. During that time, you're going to work at your tables. Write down at least one question or wondering you had while reading page 316 through 318. Just write it down in the margin of your book. And at the end of that 5 minutes, you'll come back and share with the class. Okay, so sub, you can go ahead and pause this at the moment and hit that play on the timer. And students, you can go back to your seats, take your books and your pencils with you. Make sure you're taking turns reading and writing down one question each. Doesn't have to be the same question. I'd rather it not be. So take turns reading. There's 3 pages of text. Help each other out when you get stuck on words. You may begin.